All right. Well, welcome everybody to today's session. The RPA market was introduced about 15 years ago and had almost an immediate success because it allowed organizations to automate rules-based tasks, manual tasks, without having to make massive changes to your legacy systems. Yet, now looking back 15 years later at the first wave of RPA implementations, we've seen mixed success. So we're going to unpeel that topic a little bit today with a specific zoom into the insurance industry. And for that, I am going to welcome our two panelists today. Today we have Eric Stockwell, who leads our transformation services at Genpact with a focus on the insurance market. And he's been working in tech and consulting for about 10 years, 20 years in the insurance industry with companies such as Nationwide and Hartford. So welcome, Eric.
Thank you, appreciate it.
No problem. And then Stephen Pumphrey, who leads our RPA business in Europe, has over 30 years of experience in business and tech, and day-to-day works inside captive operations, working on operating processes and transforming them. So Stephen, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
So let's start unpeeling that topic a little bit. And we're going to look at a couple of topics. One is, how is the new wave of robotic process automation different from the previous wave? And what are some of the challenges that we faced in the first wave that we're addressing now? We're going to look into another topic, which is, how do you decide how to automate and what to automate with robotic process automation? How do you choose? And finally, for those of us that are getting started in this new RPA 2.0 journey, how do you get started? So let's kick off, and I'm going to start on this first topic of how this new wave is different. So let me ask Stephen, how would you describe what's going on right now with automation?
Yeah, so I mean, what we're seeing in the marketplace at the moment, there are some quite profound changes that have really impacted even over the last 6 months or so. We know, for example, that process discovery tools are becoming easier and easier to use. They are more prominent in terms of their use, and they're driving automation demand across the board, and in insurers in particular. What we're seeing now is that if you like, that first stage, process discovery, it's driving greater enablement of automation. It's making the assessment stage easier to do. The tools are more user friendly. It's quicker and more accurate. So that's one of the trends we're seeing right now, quite different from the previous wave.
Thank you. So another thought is that you tended to see RPA applied to processes that weren't necessarily in the right shape. So Eric, what do you think with regards to how automation was happening in the first wave, especially as it relates to insurance?
Yeah, definitely. And I do think, we really are moving into a different part of RPA. There was a first iteration, we'll call it 1.0. And a lot of what happened in that first iteration was that we were looking at processes as they existed and then trying to put automation on the processes as they existed. And so what we really ended up doing was putting some automation on broken processes, and then it wasn't necessarily driving the full capability and the full value that we were expecting to see. So, really thinking differently about how do we attack the overall process and then look at what kind of tools and capabilities do we want to bring in, I think is, what we're seeing as far as this change from what we had done before. I think it's interesting because, Gartner had done a survey of the insurance industry, and they have their hype cycle. And essentially what had happened, there was a lot of excitement And then everybody put RPA in a number of places and just weren't getting the value out of it that they expected. So it went down into the trough of disillusionment. But now what Gartner is saying is that actually in the next 2 years, we'll probably double the use of RPA. And then it's really a renaissance time and remove from what really is, relatively, maybe $1 billion marketplace today, but it's going to grow 35% over the next 7 years. So, this is really the time where we're starting to see hyper automation, a new approach. And a lot of people are tagging this as RPA 2.0. And it's taking the tools that we knew, but then adding intelligent automation, adding natural language processing, adding machine learning, a whole bunch of other capabilities built into it. And not only that, taking advantage of cloud and composable services in the cloud to actually completely change not only what we're attacking as far as process, but the technical aspects of how we're going about approaching it. So I think this new RPA 2.0 is going to be a different experience than what we had seen in the past.
So you mentioned, yeah.
Oh, I'm going to say, I think that's right. And an example, very specific example that we're seeing is the increasing use of intelligent document solutions. So, because we know that those solutions have been around for a while, but they're now very much proven in practice. And what's happening, it's exactly as Eric was saying, that, when we have OCR and workflow platforms there, that actually we're seeing more RPA use cases being developed, because traditionally RPA needs to have that structured front end. And use cases that didn't exist in organizations we know before, now exist for the deployment of RPA in combination with that intelligent document solution. So it's one, very key and growing example of exactly that hyper automation impact that Eric was mentioning.
So let's double click on that for a second. So you're talking about the fact that the first wave of RPA would automate the rules-based task processes, mainly unstructured data. Now we finally have another set of tools, thanks to the advent of AI, which is intelligent document processing. And that allows for some of these front-end processes just to turn them into structured processes, so then you can apply automation. So do you guys have examples within the insurance industry of a process, whether it's in underwriting or first notice of loss, where you have unstructured data up front and then you actually are allowed to structure it now?
Yeah, I mean, there are many examples. I mean, the claims example is a very important use case. Previously, that was in wave one. That was probably too ambitious. It was too complex to take on, and some organizations attempted that, and it wasn't successful. But what we're seeing now is that there are, another key development is this introduction of, low code and no code platforms, which are, orchestration and workflow type platforms, which can stitch together a lot of these automation resources, whether they be, RPA or OCR or machine learning, for example. And it's because these new tools they're much lower cost, they're much easier to use, that it's actually complementing those other use cases. And what were previously far too complex type use cases to take on, like claims processes, now are becoming an option.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll use another example too, where we did automate with one of our clients the front end process of the underwriting. So agents will send in emails that'll have a lot of attachments, things that are fully unstructured data, and the ability to actually ingest that. And it's kind of a mixture of machine learning to understand what's actually in the unstructured data, getting it into something that's more structured, and then RPA and QPA, honestly, to be able to push that more efficiently through the entire underwriting process. So, this client has built a whole backbone for submission management from the front end of when they first get the submission all the way through to the actual bind. So making sure that, you've kind of created a journey across using the right tools at the right point. But, that drives a different kind of engagement, as well as, it's not just a cost play of value out, but how do you actually create more throughput and be able to write more business.
Perfect,
Yes.
perfect. So both of you have highlighted this kind of front end process, which now you can actually extend the benefits of RPA into the front end and structure the data. Stephen, you started touching on orchestration, which is another set of technology tools that is allowing us to look at automation more holistically beyond simple RPA. And another point is now we're seeing the business really take the reins of this effort versus IT. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, because I mean, another key characteristic of Wave 1 is that it kind of brought into relief sometimes some of the challenges between business operations and the tech teams. And that wasn't always as productive as we wanted it to be. And the thing about RPA in particular was that it was very much a business operations resource, but really it's also a technical resource. So who owns that? And I think one of the ways in which that is being bridged now, and it's really important because it really engages people in business operations in a very inclusive way, is that a lot of these technologies, and we just talked a bit about the low-code platforms and no-code platforms, they can be taken on by people they're not trained IT people. They might actually have very little coding experience. They're people working in business operations, but tools can be made available to them so that they can become citizen developers. And this is not this is not guerrilla IT. This is a formalized program for non-IT people to actually develop and use enterprise grade applications. And again, it's a really critical element of this wave. As I say, it definitely is more engaging in terms of business operations. It involves more participation of people in the business, which is very, very positive. But it also, again, critically, frankly, it reduces the economics. If you're not having to bring in super specialist technical people to do everything, it's a lower cost to deliver. And again, that means that more use cases become, there's an attractive business case for them. And again, it's another thing in this wave that's driving the volume of automations.
Right.
So you just mentioned business taking the reins, and obviously one of the big things in Wave 2 is not just the technology. I mean, we've been talking a lot about the technology that's allowing us to do things differently, but there's also the business and the actual management of RPA that's different now. So can we talk a little bit about the management and the oversight that is required, that we're now figuring out? We learned some lessons in Wave 1. Maybe Eric, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think definitely we learned some lessons, not only about kind of where we were targeting the tool, but also how we were managing the hybrid workforce, because essentially what you're doing is you're creating a mixture of machine and the human element to put together a more efficient process. And I think, looking at that, really what is necessary in order to drive the right management is at least some kind of orchestration that is able to say, this is the kind of management metrics that I expect to see in my operations. When I add in my robot and I add in a complementary human resource, what kind of throughput am I getting? How is the turnaround times changing? And all of that is data-driven and information. If you don't have the kind of tools that are giving you that operational data, it becomes very hard to know, did that actual implementation of RPA drive the kind of benefits that I was expecting? And again, it's not just about the head count. It's more about what kind of throughput, what kind of capacity increase, and all that comes out in those metrics that you're looking at around transactions and operations. So hugely important in terms of this next wave, and how do you manage kind of this human and machine interaction by getting visibility into that kind of data.
Yes,
yeah, fantastic.
That's right. And the way that I'd build on that, looking back at some of the characteristics of Wave 1, was that frankly, we collectively might not have chosen the right process to automate. As I mentioned before, sometimes they're too complex or ambitious, or sometimes they were too much about proving concept, so they were tentative and they were low in value. And so I think that issue around, for wave 2, that issue around choosing the right things to do is still there. And organizations, they actually say, we've got a growing list. It's for some of the reasons that we just mentioned. They've got a growing list of opportunities, but the capacity is limited in how they can deal with that. Often the process data that they have isn't sufficiently reliable or robust to create the business case that people can hang their hats on and really work to. And so, and there's even more pressure now in terms of having, short-term returns, capacity release, and so on. So, touching on that, that how is this managed and how do we do things? What is the operating model? This increasing focus on how do we get that operating model to work very efficiently at scale, but throughout the entire life cycle, from the conception of these ideas, as I'm saying, to more quickly be able to and effectively be able to assess ideas for automation, put them into action, all the way to the retirement of these automation solutions in however many years' time. So that operating model, I think, now is more important than ever that we're moving to scale.
Fantastic. So to summarize on this first section, why is Wave 2 different? We have, first of all, a number of technologies. The technologies has matured that allow us both to handle structured and unstructured documents, which allows you to get closer to the end-to-end process, and workflow tools that are low code or no code that allow you to orchestrate this automation. And secondly, we've learned our lessons from Wave 1. We understand now the importance of managing and setting up a governance of this hybrid workforce, and to think about the operating model that will set us up for success. So you touched upon something, Steven, right now, which is the question of the business case and the question of knowing what to automate. So let's unpeel that for our second question a little bit. And I'm going to bring up a slide, which is kind of what are some of the challenges that companies are facing when they're looking at automation. And let's talk about this business case for a moment. What are some of the considerations that companies need to determine when they're looking at what to automate? I think one of them is, what can you measure? So can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in on that one to kick off with. I think whilst we, have always anticipated that automation has a wide range of benefits, we're looking at, customer satisfaction, faster cycle time, more accuracy, fewer process dropouts. I think we also have to acknowledge that most companies right now, they are looking for capacity release, and certainly when we're looking at the companies that we're working with at Genpact, that is almost exclusively the target and the stated prime objective of the automations, and I think that is something that is effectively it is measurable. But sometimes the way in which people are deployed into operations is done in a complicated way necessarily, in the sense that they may work on different things, they may have different tasks that they work on throughout. So I think it's really important that there are very robust systems for first of all making sure the calculation is correct, and we're not automating things only to find that the benefits are much lower later on. But also that operations can realize that benefit, that they can, manage the work scheduling so that benefit can be realized in practice.
That's right. But beyond capacity release, I mean, if you're looking at the insurance industry, Eric, you've been working on a lot of transformation projects. What are some of the key metrics that companies in insurance are looking to measure when they're doing transformation and automation projects?
Yeah, definitely. Great question that came in from the audience about, how do you build this business case for wave two? And I think, it's hugely important to actually create something that is going to show return and show return early, because, like we said, there was a hype cycle where people got disillusioned. If you're not showing value early and you're kind of having this regular iteration of value, your business is going to get tired again. So a plan around what is your business case, how you're going to drive value, and how you're going to iteratively go and continue to show value is really important in terms of making sure that you keep momentum behind it. But I'll use an example where we were dealing with a client that was trying to transform their claims operation, and they had actually had a fairly large consulting firm come in. They looked at their overall claims operation. They made a whole bunch of suggestions. The carrier made their changes, and they thought they had all of the things in place that they needed. And they were really trying to build a business case around more efficiency, better throughput, and more satisfaction in terms of the end of the claim, when the claim was actually done. So they kind of use those three metrics. So, two that are kind of more financial, and then one is a little bit softer, kind of more of an experience one. So again, they had already gone through a transformation program. When we came in, one of the things that we did is knowing that how you target the processes and what you're targeting the processes to change, those decisions are hugely important. We use some of the typical tools, right? You do the interviews, you look at standard operating procedures, and you understand kind of what your agents and clients want to do, which are three main levers. But the one lever that we used also was putting a process mining tool on top of what they were doing in their claims operation. When we put the process mining tool on, and this wasn't an operational productivity one, this was one where we just asked them to dump us their data. So timestamp data out of their claim systems. We ran it through, and even though they had done this transformation program, we were able to show them that nothing in their process happened more than 1% of the time. So they actually hadn't standardized anything. They actually still had a whole bunch of workarounds, a whole bunch of places where things were falling out of the system. And so we said, look, you can't automate anything if you have processes that don't happen more than 1% of the time. Our normal standard is you're looking for 40% of the time, 60% of the time. That's a place where you can put some of these tools and capabilities and really drive a significant amount of business value. So again, starting with that process, starting with standardization, and not just using the normal tools, using some of the new tools to be able to actually visually see how this is happening, creates a whole different business case, financially, experience, as well as visually, for senior executives to understand, hey, okay, I get it. I see how all this stuff is actually falling out to the side. So I think it's hugely important that we think differently about the business case and how we take that. And then, like I said, iteratively making sure we're driving value so the business stays engaged through the whole process.
Yeah, so it's interesting you bring up this question of the process mining and the digital twins that kind of happen up front, allowing you to determine whether or not it's even worth automating that process, or whether you need to spend more time up front standardizing it, but they have a cost, these process mining, these digital twin tools. So do they impact your business case as you're trying to build it, the investment in these upfront tools, or is it actually totally worth it because at the end of the day, it helps you get a much better outcome? Just curious about those.
Yeah, it's a good question. We can do a whole separate webinar on process mining tools, but the reality is that upfront view of let me just take some data and do some analytics on the data is actually not all that expensive. And when you look at your business case, it actually is very easy to pay off. The thing I'll tell you though is that the real benefit comes when you move to the second stage of process mining and you actually attach it to your production systems. Now, like I said before, in terms of seeing how your operation is running, having the metrics and understanding how does this human robot thing work, that tool sitting in production drives a tremendous amount of value, making sure you're actually getting what you expected to get out of it. So thinking about process mining, not only in one way, but thinking about it in kind of two, to drive not only the front end business case, but the realization and how do I manage this day to day is, it's kind of a new way to think about it, but it's hugely important.
Absolutely. It's not just for the beginning, it's throughout the life cycle. So Stephen, you were talking about scale, the importance of choosing an automation project that's going to allow you to scale. What most insurers, how many processes do they start with? Or most companies you've been working with, how do you know that you're starting at the right scale?
Yeah, so I mean, I think most organizations, if they're just starting out, they will choose a relatively small number, 10 or fewer to start off with. And I think that's a good thing. I think we're well beyond now, if you like, the technical proof of concept, which was very popular because we know, the tools are very good and we know they work, they're all proven in practice now. I think proof of value is probably a more important concept to show not that we can build tools, that we can automate them because we know we can do that. It's whether we can prove operationally that the value can be delivered. So I think that's where a lot of organizations are quite rightly starting now. For insurers, for RPA, it tends to be as a handful. And it may not be, of course, in, if you like, vertical operations. They're still extremely important, in the horizontal functions. There's been a big impact in F&A, and so that's quite often where the project starts. Rather in, if you like, in the insurance core processes, and also in HR. But it does take a while to get the rate at which automation can be done up to a sustainable level, because there are, although the technology is pretty straightforward, it takes an orchestration of many things in the organization to work operationally, but also in different parts of the different tech departments in business applications and infrastructure to be ready for that. And sometimes it takes organizations some time before they're truly efficient at doing that, and it's only at that stage that they can move on to the the multiple tens, the 50s, the hundreds and beyond.
Got it. That's helpful. So I'm going to switch out to the questions. We're getting a couple of questions coming. I want to make sure we address them. So the first question that came in is, how do you choose the most appropriate platform? And are there any additional things to consider in wave 2? So who wants to take a shot at that?
Well, I'll make a start on that. I mean, so the good news is that there are a lot of extremely good tools out there. There is currently the sort of the big three, if you like, and many on the call will know that they are, Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, and UiPath. They are all excellent tools, and we in Genpact, we use them all at scale. And there are some new organizations coming in as well, and Microsoft has entered the market with Power Automate, which is exciting for us. But I think in choosing which one, there are some headline considerations. I think the first thing is this something at the customer front end when you want a bot to help your service agent? Or is this more of a middle or back office process where that processing can just go on in a continuous way? And that first group are they're called attended bots, because they actually sit on the workstations of the people doing the work, and they're often sort of go get me type bots. Go and get me this customer's information. Go get me the records on this particular, the claims and policies for this particular organization. And some of the vendors are better at that front end, if you like, attended bots, whereas others are really focusing their product set much more on those major scale processes. They talk as the digital workers, if you like, and these are unattended bots. They sit in the cloud or they sit in the data centers rather than on the desktop. So that, I think that's one very important consideration. And I think another one increasingly, and it relates to something that we mentioned earlier on, is if you like, the citizen developer, or how easy it is to use these tools. If an organization is very much, no, we want to make sure that these are enterprise-grade IT tools that are developed by very well-trained and experienced developers, then there's one set of tools which really work well for that and are doing well. And there are other tools which are much more made to be, for almost anybody to use. They're no code, low code.
Yep.
And you don't need a huge amount of training to be able to get good automations working from them. And again, there's another class of tools that are more appropriate for that. So, I mean, lots of criteria and so on, but those two that I've just mentioned are probably the main
considerations. Yeah. So you did mention kind of the unsupervised bots and the ones that would kind of work more independently. That brings us to the questions of AI. And we got a question asking if we see the need for increased AI integration with RPA. You're seeing UiPath, for example, coming up with the implementation of AI Fabric. So do we see the need for more AI integration with RPA? Eric, maybe you want to get us started there with the need for AI and RPA integration.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like we kind of started at the beginning, the first iteration of RPA was really just around using the tools to automate some processes that really weren't necessarily changed or transformed. It is, in this RPA 2.0, where you can call it, intelligent automation, smart process automation. There's a number of different terms out there. But essentially what it is taking all of those capabilities from natural language processing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, marrying it up with the bot to be able to do things. So that combination is actually hugely important in terms of making a different kind of approach to the work. So like we talked about, the unstructured data coming in, putting some artificial intelligence on it and machine learning on it that then moves it back into a bot to actually do an activity or transaction on, that changes the process, that transforms what happens. So I think it is an important step. So Stephen, I don't know your thoughts on any of the tools.
Well, I think, and I think those points are right. I mean, I suppose the other part of this is that, that there's the technical side and there's the tools and how they're combined. That's important, but equally important really is just how profoundly, we understand processes. The deep, it's not just domain expertise, but really profound understanding, detailed knowledge of every single element of those processes. It's one of the most important, inputs to this whole process. It doesn't matter which of the automation technologies or combinations we're talking about. And now I think that's another aspect of this wave too, that this automation drive isn't being led by technologists or the deployment of tools per se, but it's actually being led by much more by people who are super deep process subject matter experts who also happen to understand and can ask for help on using the full suite of tools available to them from a hyper automation perspective.
Right, so that's the critical role of the human in the loop, the human expert who's going to first, set the goals of the AI and the machine learning models, and then feed it in so that it can improve over time. We got another question. We're going to shift gears a little bit because you talked about cloud up front, and the question is, what considerations are there when moving RPA to the cloud? Are most organizations doing this migration, taking their RPA maybe from wave one and moving it to the cloud, or just jumping directly to cloud-based RPA? What are some of the considerations they need to think about?
Yeah, well,
I'll go ahead, Steve.
So, I mean, I think as a broader comment, we all know that the role that a traditional data center will play in the structure of an enterprise is diminishing, and most of us anticipate it'll more or less disappear, over the coming years, and that everything will sit in some form of cloud. In terms of RPA specifically, we've got to think about, well, where does RPA come from? And the answer is, well, it emulates what humans do. And humans log into applications and they hopefully memorize business application credentials. They don't write them down anywhere. And in that same way, bots with RPA do that same thing. So they emulate that, and they use user credentials that they have in a secure place, hopefully a secure data vault, and they use those to go into the applications the core and critical business applications. So I think if we're at a standing start and we haven't built any RPA, then is it cloud or is it on-prem? Really, the most fundamental question to ask is around how mature the organization is in terms of cybersecurity and the policies for the way in which business application credentials are managed and kept super secure. Because if you think about these business applications, they are, it really is very important that they're kept secure, and probably in insurance more than any other sector. So that's fundamentally what it's all about. Technically, it's just as easy to build these bots in the cloud as it is in the data center, and it can be better and quicker if there's a cycle time for provisioning virtual machines in the data center, versus the cloud. So technically, it's just as easy to do, but it's all around. It all revolves around those business access credentials. And then the only build I would have on that, of course, is that for a lot of insurers today, if you look at a lot of the business processes, where are those applications? And the answer is they're already in the cloud. They're ServiceNow, they're Salesforce, they are Oracle on Demand, whatever it happens to be. And if that's the case, and that's what the process is touching throughout, then it's just much more logical to build that bot in the cloud in the first place. So, those are the key considerations as we see it today.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, as an AWS partner, as an Azure partner, we're seeing all our insurance carrier clients moving in this direction. And it's not the old lift and shift. I'm taking something on-prem and I'm just putting it in the cloud. And it's not the private cloud anymore, because that was kind of the interim step for insurance carriers. And there are so many new composable services for AI and ML in the cloud natively that rebuilding the tool up in the cloud really is different than that lift and shift and just moving it out there. So I completely agree. The one call out, Stephen, that you mentioned is security. I think that's a hugely important thing. Doing RPA creates gaps, right? Anytime you put in a new technology, it creates some security gaps. But the ability to put AI and machine learning on top of it actually helps the tool itself control the security. So the ability to kind of use RPA on a security with that kind of cybersecurity mind is hugely important as well. So, just another step in terms of that whole, RPA 2.0 thought process.
So thank you very much. That's really helpful. We've talked about the tools a lot. We've talked about the importance for the business to really think through, take the lead, and consider, kind of this end-to-end transformation. So now we're getting towards the end of our session, and I'd like us all to reflect for those people on the phone who are really looking to get started in the second wave. How do you get started? If you had to summarize kind of your top thoughts on how do you get started on this journey, Eric?
Yeah, let me give you 4 points and then I'll throw it over to Stephen. So first, like I talked about, start with process standardization. Get to a place where you're going to drive the most value by understanding what processes you need to standardize and making sure that you've done that before jumping into RPA. Second one, integrate the solution into the overall ecosystem. I think we talked about just the fact that it needs to be a journey. It needs to look at the entire enterprise architecture, and some of that plays into which platforms you choose, right? So making sure you understand the enterprise architecture and how this fits in. Third, develop a change management plan, because you are going to change how people work. You need to have a change management and communication plan that helps them get there. One of the realistic things to think about, though, is a lot of people think there's resistance. Deloitte did a study, and actually, when you're doing RPA in a pilot, only 17% of the employees resist. When you start to do it at scale, it drops to 3%. So actually, the more you do it, the more people understand and the more they actually embrace it. So that change plan is important. And then 4, get IT and stakeholder buy-in. I know we talked a lot about citizen developers and all that. You need the IT department to help come in and understand where it's going. We've done this with 2 clients already where we've built an automation COE that actually brings in best practices, standards, and ways of approaching it that includes IT, includes business stakeholders. So it's a broader thing than just implementing a bot. It's actually an entire center of excellence about how the company is going to approach it. So those 4, to me, are really the important ways to get started.
And I think, yeah, I think that covers the ground. You've not left me much, Eric. I suppose my one build would be, and it comes to that, center of excellence point that you made at the end, that what we're seeing now with organizations that we work with is, whereas in the past it would be, let's start doing a few automations, let's understand how this all works, let's run proof of concepts and so on. Now we're seeing organizations say, no, we need to understand the operating model for this, because we're going to need that. We now know we're going to need that when we get to scale. So we need to make sure, by operating model, I just mean how the organization does it, how it's structured, yes, sure, but also what are the processes that it works? How does it run the delivery lifecycle? How does it identify opportunities? How does it govern that? How does it support live automations? How does it retire them? And so on. All of those elements, including how does the, how do the tech teams and infrastructure in particular underpin that and support it and provide a clear way for those developments to happen. So what we're seeing now is organizations do that right from the start, rather than get to the point where there may be 15, 20 bots in and things aren't working quite as well as they'd expected in terms of getting the benefits, and they're scratching their heads wondering where things have gone wrong. So I'd say almost without exception now, organizations are really focusing on getting that operating model right.
Right, and so the last question that came in was about the fact that how do you motivate people who've had a failed RPA implementation? How do you re-engage the teams? And so that comes down to what you were just saying, getting the operating model right, the change management right. Any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no silver bullet in terms of how to remotivate the teams. It's many of the same things, but I think right now, organizations, really are having a super focus on getting those short-term benefits, especially around capacity release. And if we look at insurance in particular, a lot of areas of the business are under a lot of stress, with peaks of queries and claims coming in. So I think there's a lot of concern around whether the capacity is there in the short term and the medium term to be able to deal with all of this. So I think there is a business imperative in insurance to deal with that, and the whole of the automation area is absolutely one of the key pillars about dealing with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, a few thoughts.
Fantastic. Well, we're at the end of our time. I did see a couple of other questions come in. So please, if we can bring up the final slide with our point of contact. I'll just summarize what we just said about how to get started. Start with process standardization. Make sure you integrate with the overall ecosystem. Develop a strong change management and communication plan to engage the teams. Get the buy-in from IT, and really think through your operating model as you embark on these projects. I want to thank our panelists today. Stephen and Eric, thank you so much. And everybody who joined us, I hope you found this insightful. Don't hesitate to reach out. We'd like to offer up, if you are interested, a 90-minute session with you to think through all of the considerations that you're tackling in your organization. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. Until then, thank you very much and have a wonderful day.